Did Samuel actually come and appear before Saul after his death when the witch of Endor called him up? In Luke 16:26, Yeshua tells us in his parable that there is a divide between heaven and hell that cannot be crossed. Is that divide also between heaven and earth? If so, was Samuel able to cross the divide, or was it a demon and not Samuel who was actually speaking to Saul?
Now, thank you for this question, which brings us to an intriguing and strange story, that of the witch of Endor. Let me first say that this story is often used to support the belief that one can call on the dead and bring them up. Today, there are many Christian denominations which encourages the prayers even to the dead. I believe that this story actually shows the exact opposite, that we cannot communicate with the dead. No one can call on the dead, and even less so bring them up. And when they think they do, it is a hoax from the demonic world. It's like playing with the demons, who can take on the form or the voice of a dead person to fool the people. And the law of God sternly forbids such things. See what God says in Deuteronomy 18, verses 10 to 12. I will begin with this verse.
There shall not be found among you anyone who calls on a medium or a spiritist or one who calls up the dead. For all who do these things are an abomination to the Lord, and because of these abominations, the Lord your God drives them out from before you.
Now, this passage clearly and forcefully forbids the calling of the dead spirit or any communication with them, a communication that is in fact impossible, but one which touches the demonic world. Now, this being said, what happened with Saul and Samuel? The story of 1 Samuel 28, I want to tell you, is exceptional. I believe that it is Saul who came up, not because the witch brought him up, but because God did this. In fact, the witch herself was so surprised when she saw Samuel. She did not expect him. Samuel was brought back so that he could give a final prophecy on the preservation of Israel and declare the end of Saul's dynasty. Saul, by the way, was not supposed to be king of Israel. You know, he was from the tribe of Benjamin, not from the tribe of Judah. So this story brings us at a point in Saul's life when he felt that as king of Israel, he was losing the grip on his throne, and the enemies of Israel were getting closer and closer to Jerusalem. So when Saul sought words and direction from God, there was none. There was no prophet from God. And so he went to see a medium, the witch of Endor, to bring back up Samuel the prophet. And so he goes. And once he has contact with the witch, we read in verse 11, she asked him, "Whom shall I bring up for you?" And he said, "Bring up Samuel for me." She does not argue, it's no big deal, but this time it is different. She's out for a surprise. See her fear and dread when she sees Samuel himself appearing. See verse 12. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice. Why did she cry out with a loud voice? Because she did not expect to see Samuel. Perhaps she herself knew that the whole thing about speaking to the dead was a scam, but here God caught her at her own game. So the Hebrew word, by the way, krayat, Zaak in Hebrew, is a cry for help, a cry of horror, as when the Israelites cried out to God when they were in bondage in Egypt, or when under the threat of hardship of other enemies. And she cried out with a loud voice, Bekol Gadol, it's written. It was not routine business for her. But she is not the only one to be amazed in this story. See that Samuel is as well. Look at verse 15. Now Samuel said to Saul, "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" The word disturb, ragaz, is defined as coming out quaking with fear, excited, agitated. It seems that Samuel was not warned as he was called. He perhaps thought that something drastic happened in Israel. One rabbi said that Samuel thought that it was the day of his judgment. This is why he was so anxious. But because we are told in Ecclesiastes 9:5 that the dead know nothing, the Talmud also understood this verse to say that the dead have no knowledge of what is happening on earth. This is how some interpret Samuel's surprise. So both the witch and Samuel are surprised. So it is not everyday business we're reading about here. And see what Samuel answers God in verse 16. Why then do you ask me, seeing the Lord has departed from you, speaking to Saul, of course, has departed from you and has become your enemy, he says. This is quite a statement. Saul became an enemy of God, and this is after so many repeated acts of disobedience that we see in the book of Samuel. This is when Samuel gives a prophecy about the nation which must have been in a pitiful state, seeing how their leader is so disabled and their enemies right at the door. So Samuel's prophecy for them is in verse 19.
Moreover, the Lord will also deliver Israel with you into the hands of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. The Lord will also deliver the army of Israel into the hands of the Philistines.
And so it happened. Israel was delivered, in the hands of the Philistines, but the nation was preserved, and Saul and his children were killed. Now, why would God give a prophecy about the death of Saul? Why not just let him go? He was already very distraught. Here he is given this added knowledge of his imminent death. I would tell this prophecy is really another act of grace from God. One of the many we see in the book of Samuel. Here God warns Saul so that perhaps he would repent. The whole sin is an act of grace for the medium as well as it is for Saul. Also, did you know that in this short conversation of 4 verses, Samuel mentions the name of God 7 times between verses 16 to 19, as if to call Saul's heart and also of this woman to come back to God. But Saul did not get it at all. You know what he did right after? He had a sumptuous meal with the witch. From verses 21 to 25, we have the description of this meal. Instead of turning back to God, Saul had communion with the witch, who here becomes so motherly and caring. It is a strange turn of events. This is the other amazing part of the story. But all of this describes a story of rebellion, as we're going to see, in fact, on our study of Deuteronomy 12. Samuel said it before, and clearly so. It's in Samuel 15:23 of 1 Samuel, for rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king. The story of the witch of Endor is wrapped up in these words. For more information on this section, you can go to the study of 1 Samuel part 15. It's available on our website.